Punctuation is an extremely important part of the SAT grammar section. Approximately 2/3 of the grammar questions in the first reading module will involve punctuation in some way. The same is true of the hard module, where the punctuation rules will be more difficult and more unusual. The easy module places less emphasis on punctuation, which comprises only about 1/3 of the total grammar questions. Perhaps this shows that the SAT considers punctuation rules to be, on the whole, more difficult than other grammar rules. No matter which module you're in, mastering punctuation is essential for a top score. This lesson will provide an overview of the punctuation rules and punctuation strategies that you need for the SAT grammar section. However, I highly recommend that you watch my individual lessons on each rule, which you can find on the Settele Tutoring channel homepage and the playlist in the description for this video. Each rule has common traps and nuances that are explained in much more detail and with concrete examples in those other videos. For now, let's start with an overview of the punctuation marks that you will see on the SAT. The simplest punctuation mark is the period. It has just one purpose. It will always be used to separate two complete sentences, which we sometimes call independent clauses. Periods are an extremely important punctuation mark that you need to notice right away whenever they appear in the answer choices. They tell you to check the paragraph for complete independent sentences. The semicolon is almost always the same as a period. By far, its most common usage is to separate two complete independent sentences. Occasionally, the semicolon can be used to separate items in complicated lists. This rule is rarely tested on the SAT, but it does come up every once in a while, so it's worth knowing. For examples of both semicolon rules, please watch my separate lesson on semicolons, which you can find in the grammar playlist in this video's description and on the Settele Tutoring channel homepage. Like periods, semicolons are extremely important to notice when they appear in the answer choices because they give us a clear test looking for two complete sentences in the paragraph. Colons are also very important to notice in the answer choices and immediately test against the rest of the paragraph. Colons are more flexible than periods and semicolons, though. They only require a complete sentence before the colon. After the colon, it's possible to have another complete sentence, but you can also have a dependent clause, which is sometimes known as an extra clause or a sentence fragment. Many people believe that colons are used for lists, but this is not always the case. In fact, associating colons with lists is one of the most common grammar traps that you'll find on the SAT. Lists sometimes follow colons, but the rules on this page are much more important to follow. Memorize them and watch my lesson on colons for examples and details. Commas have lots of rules, so they are not as important as periods, semicolons, and colons. It's best to leave them for last when sorting through the answer choices. You will often choose a comma after process of elimination has narrowed down your options. Usually, commas are used to attach extra dependent clauses to complete sentences. This can happen at the beginning or at the end of a sentence. Sometimes, two commas are used to insert an interruption into the middle of a complete independent sentence. Commas can also be used to attach extra clauses to other extra clauses. Commas have other rules involving lists, quotations, cities, dates, and many other things, but these aren't really tested on the SAT. Almost every time we think about commas on the SAT, we're interested in sentence structure. This is especially important to remember when we're trying to connect two independent clauses. A comma by itself is not enough to join two sentences. On the SAT, you must use a comma and a conjunction, like the words and or but. Again, I have a video lesson on the rules for conjunctions, and you should definitely watch it. Dashes are also a secondary punctuation mark on the SAT, mostly because it's usually obvious when a dash will be part of the correct answer. A single dash can be used exactly like a colon to add an extra clause after a complete sentence. Double dashes are placed at the beginning and end of an interruption, just like two commas. Stylistically, it's better to use two dashes when the interruption itself contains commas, so that the reader isn't confused about where the interruption begins and ends. The dashes are visually distinctive, so they also add emphasis to the interruption. Apostrophes are also relatively easy to work with because, when they appear in the choices, the entire question will probably be exclusively about apostrophe rules. Usually, apostrophes show possession. In real life, it's possible that they show the contraction of two words, but this is actually pretty rare on the SAT. The most important thing to remember is that possessive pronouns never get apostrophes. This comes up whenever the SAT offers you the different versions of words like its and their. Parentheses in the SAT are mostly a distraction, so they are a low priority. They're used to insert an interruption, similar to dashes and commas. However, parentheses are much easier to keep track of because they always come in pairs. If you see parentheses in a paragraph, you can usually ignore them and whatever they contain. It's not relevant for the structure of the sentence. Finally, question marks are occasionally the focus of grammar questions, but they're also a low priority. They have a simple rule. They are only used when you're asking a literal question. Once you've memorized the rules for the punctuation marks, you can start thinking strategically about how to answer punctuation questions on the SAT. For every grammar question, the main strategy is to use the answer choices to predict the rule. Before you start reading the paragraph, you should think about which rules might apply based on what's changing in the answer choices. For example, if you see a semicolon or a period, you know to check the paragraph for complete independent clauses. If you see a dash, you know to check for a second dash somewhere else. And as you check, don't be lazy. The SAT wants you to take shortcuts and only read parts of the sentences. But if you do, you will fall into traps. Whenever the SAT is testing punctuation, you must read the entire sentence from capital letter to period. When you're confused, you can sometimes use overlaps in the rules to help you eliminate answers. Since some punctuation marks have the exact same function, you can sometimes cross out answers that would be identical. Let's look at some examples of overlaps. The most important overlaps involve ways to separate two complete sentences. Periods and semicolons are almost always exactly the same. So if the answer choices contain options with a period and a semicolon with the exact same wording, you know that they are probably both wrong because they can't both be right. Colons can also be used to separate two sentences, and so can commas when they are paired with conjunctions. Interruptions can be marked off with 2 commas or 2 dashes. The SAT will usually make the decision of which to use for you, and then your task will be to complete the symmetry. Explanation clauses can be added to the end of a sentence using either a colon or a single dash. Again, if the SAT offers you both options, there isn't really a way to choose between them, so it's likely that both are wrong. Using these punctuation overlaps effectively requires complete confidence in the punctuation rules. This lesson was meant to be an overview of those rules, but please do more. Watch my lessons on the individual grammar rules to see specific examples of how these punctuation marks work on the SAT. Then, use my explanation videos to practice the grammar questions from the College Board's SAT question bank. The punctuation questions on the SAT can absolutely be mastered and perfected if you know the rules and deploy the strategies. I hope this was a good start. Thanks for watching.